should be very shortly.
It's not there yet.
Okay.
Keep. Yep, it's ready.
Ready?
It's live.
Right. We'll begin. Evening, everyone, and welcome to this online meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee on Tuesday, the 8th of September 2020. I'm Councillor Chris Pearson, Councillor for Beachurch Ward, and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. This meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet and on the Council's YouTube channel, and will also be available to watch afterwards. Just to begin, a few matters of housekeeping. With the exception of Democratic Services officers advising us, would participants all please mute their microphones unless they're invited to speak. I will ask for each item of business to be presented and then ask each member of the panel in turn if they wish to ask a question or comment. At the end of each item of business, I'll ask each panel member in turn to confirm audibly how they wish to vote, although we've already determined that. If we're still operating at 8 o'clock, we'll have a short break. I've had no indication of substitutions, no urgent matters. Can I ask anyone if they have a declaration of interest? No? All right, I'll just ask everyone to introduce themselves then. So if I start with Councillor Gocher.
Councillor Mark Gocher from Castle Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Councillor Barbara Wood from Tiptree Ward.
Councillor Willits.
Dennis Willits, Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Councillor Barlow.
Councillor Nick Barlow, Castle Ward.
Councillor Dundas.
Councillor Paul Dundas, Stanway Ward.
And Councillor McCarthy.
Good evening, I'm Councillor McCarthy, I represent Shrub End Ward and I'm also the Deputy Chair on this panel.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone? No. Right. Okay. So there were no declarations of interest. We've had no indications of have your say. So that takes us to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 23rd of June 2020. Any issues with those minutes from anyone? No? Okay. Can we accept those as a true record? If you just indicate by nodding, that will be acceptable. Thank you, one and all. Right. That moves us on to item 7 then, which is Colchester Borough Homes annual governance statement. And at this stage, I think it's important for me just to express the council's apology for the fact that part of this agenda item wasn't uploaded to the website until fairly late in the day. I'm assured that that shouldn't make any difference. We have everything in front of us. What we have in front of us isn't too dissimilar to what we've seen at previous meetings when we've considered this matter anyway. So unless anyone has any concerns about that, we'll proceed with item 6. I'm not seeing any indications, so we'll move straight into item 6, and Julie Parker is to present this to us. If you could please, Ms. Parker.
Right. Hello. Thank you for inviting me and my colleagues to the committee. Just to introduce myself, I'm an independent member of Colchester Borough Homes Board. I do notice that we have Councillor Fox with us, and I don't know whether Councillor Fox wanted to just say some words of introduction before I introduce the report.
I'm more than happy for Councillor Fox to do so.
Thank you.
Yes, very kind of you. Good evening, everybody. As you know, Colchester Borough Homes is the council's arm's length management organisation, and is responsible for the management and maintenance of the council's housing stock. You receive a report every year as part of the work of the Governance and Audit Committee. I think that the report in front of you this evening shows a continued high quality of governance at Colchester Borough Homes, and I will leave it up to Julie to introduce the report. I know that Matt is here as well, and that Andrew Tyrrell is here from the client team as well, and really happy to answer any questions that you have, both from our side as the council, but I know colleagues from Colchester Borough Homes will too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Yes, welcome Matt Armstrong and Andrew Tyrrell as well on this item. So over to you then, Ms Parker.
Okay, thank you. So you as a council do consolidate Colchester Borough Homes accounts into your accounts, and this report is about the governance arrangements at Colchester Borough Homes, so that and it reports on those governance arrangements, so that you then, when you're consolidating it all into your accounts, can have assurance about the Colchester Borough Homes work. So the governance statement is attached, and I'll just briefly go through the governance arrangements. The Colchester Borough Homes has its own board, and that is a company with company responsibilities. We discharge those responsibilities in various ways, and we have a finance and audit committee, which I chair, and we look at the arrangements for governance that the company has in place. And we have set out in the report under 5.3 the arrangements that we look at. The principal things that are most relevant for that you're examining probably today are around the external audit. So for 2019-20, we had our external auditors, who are Scrutton Bland, look at the accounts and give us a clean audit opinion. Their approach has been similar to previous years. The one exception is that because of COVID, they needed to do their work remotely. And I'm sure you're quite familiar with similar arrangements for the council as well. So they came along to our Finance and Audit Committee and also to the full board, where we approved and where we considered and approved the accounts. But I think the important things to stress is they gave us a clean audit opinion. We also utilise internal audit, which is the same audit firm as yourselves. So we had Mazars for the relevant year. We are changing that, like you are, to TIA, but for 2019-20, we had Mazars. They undertook 12 internal audits and undertook a separate review of risk management. We set out in the report the gradings on those audits, and overall there was little change in the control environment that we had. We've quoted in the report exactly as it was included in the internal auditor's report to us, and they gave us substantial assurance. So that's the basis on which we as an audit committee and as a board were assured that we've got the proper arrangements and appropriate arrangements in place, and thus feel we can give appropriate assurance to you. The appendix to the report that you've just recently received does set out the detailed arrangements that we have in place, very similar to previous years. So I'm sure you're quite familiar, you may well be quite familiar with that content. And then towards the end of that particular report, we do set out the governance issues that we had during the year, and in particular the areas where we feel that there's some actions to take going forward. And we've got action plans that support those areas that we need to put a little bit more attention to. So really what I'm bringing to you within these two reports is the assurance that we've got proper governance arrangements in place that you can then rely on in your consideration of the council's position. So I'll stop there and happily take any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong or Mr. Tyrrell, anything that you wanted to add before I open it up to questions, comments?
No, nothing from me, thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
For me, the Chair, thank you.
No, all right. I'll open up to questions then. Any or comments? Anything from members? I'm not seeing any indication. I mean, I'll just say I think that's indicative of the fact that we usually get a very good report from Colchester Borough Homes on an annual basis. This is no different to what we're used to. It provides us with the reassurance that we need to ensure that Colchester Borough Homes is being overseen appropriately. And I thank you all. I'm not seeing any indication, so we're just asked to note this report.
Chair, if I may just interject, Councillor Willits has his hand up there.
Yeah. Councillor Willits. Thanks, Sam.
Yes, Chairman. It's a very pleasing report to read, and clearly this is a well-managed organisation which has the right governance and the right auditing systems in place. And we have a history of looking at Colchester Borough Homes Limited and observing that, as in any organisation, occasionally controls are discovered to be a little weaker than were anticipated, but remedial action has always been taken at the right time. If I get a little pedantic and nitpicking, we always call ourselves a council, Colchester Borough Council, to indicate our legal status. Colchester Borough Homes seems to forget most of the time that it is a limited company. And nowhere in this report does it really remind us, by using the correct title for the company, that that's what it is. I would also have expected to have seen in sort of paragraphs 1, 2, or 3, somewhere around there, that the company is subject to the Local Authority Companies Order 1995 in regard to effectively opening of the accounts to the parent body, so that we are entitled to see everything. That has never been an issue, but from a governance point of view, it should be mentioned. The other minor issue I have is in say 1.3, the status seems to be given as an ALMO, whereas the ALMO was purely an informal arrangement at the time the Better Homes project was set up in 2008. At that time, there were some 70 ALMOs across the country, setting up their organisations to take sort of 40 million, I think it was in our case, from the government to improve the housing stock. That has now dwindled to only 30, I think it was 37 at the beginning of this financial year. And it would have been good to have seen some note in this report why it is that that so almost half the ALMOs have actually dropped that particular modus of operation. Although I can see the work that Colchester Borough Homes Limited does for the council in managing the housing stock is first rate, but it would be reassuring to know why it is that so many have thrown in the towel on being an ALMO. From the governance and audit point of view, I'd also expected to see some reference to the fact that HMRC has given Colchester Borough Homes exemption in regard to paying tax for any transactions between Colchester Borough Council and Colchester Borough Homes Limited. But apart from those sort of preambles to what one would have expected if we were being absolutely strict on our governance terminology, I was very reassured to read paragraph 5.9 in, I think it was in the old version rather than the new version, although they may still be the same, of the very satisfactory nature of the audits the 12 audits over the last 2 years. This is certainly what we expect, and I think as a committee we are reassured to know that while the governance arrangements of Colchester Borough Homes Limited are different, they're marginally different from those which we have within the council, they are wholly compatible, and therefore it is with great ease that their accounts are assimilated into the group accounts as part of our overall audit. So this report just goes on to reassure me of the position that has been prevailing for the last few years, that Colchester Borough Homes is well managed, government's arrangements are compatible, the audit arrangements are compatible, and altogether I think they're doing a splendid job in terms of the governance and quality management within that organisation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Willett. I'm sure that all who sail in CBH will be pleased to hear your praise for the way in which they are managing Colchester Borough Homes. In terms of the nomenclature that's used in the report, I'll just open that up to one of the officers to answer that. In terms of the request for information about other ALMOs, I don't think that's really the nature of this report, is it? It's a report to us. I take your point about it would be interesting to know, but this report is a report on Colchester Borough Homes to the Governance and Audit Committee. Perhaps next year there might be just a comment on why and how well we are doing relative to what's happened in other parts of the country. Who would like to respond to Councillor Willett's in terms of the description that's used in the report?
Well, I'm happy to respond. I note your point about that, and we can take that on board in for future years.
Thank you very much. All right. I don't see any other hands, so as I say, we're just asked to note the report and the recommendations. We've reviewed and accepted the assurances. So if you'd like to just nod your approval. Yeah, I think that's unanimous, Matthew. Thank you very much, one and all, for attending this evening.
Thank you.
We'll move on to
Thank you.
item 8.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Cook, over to you.
This is the revenue monitoring report for the first quarter of 2021, which I'm sure as the committee will appreciate is quite an unusual year because of COVID. So I think the key part of the document is Appendix C on page 38. And that shows us that the key changes in the council's financial position are the economic and income pressures, 9.392 million, which is our additional costs and loss of sales, fees and charges. And then since we reported to Cabinet in June, in the lower half of the table, we have got a significant improvement in our position because of the grant from MHCLG for council's income loss, which at the time of this report, we were forecasting about 5.1 million. I think it might be slightly less because we've now got the detailed grant conditions from MHCLG. We're working quite hard on making the claim, which is due in at the end of September. But that additional government support has been a bit of a game changer, really, because we were facing a very significant use of reserves. And now, as you'll see in about 3 rows up from the bottom, period 3, we were forecasting about 2.2 million use of reserves. So all these figures are moving. Certainly on income loss, we're working quite hard with service managers to keep reviewing those forecasts. We think car parking might be improving slightly from the time of this report. And let's all hope that, you know, we do manage to recover more sales fees and charges income than in this sort of, you know, central forecast. So we expect to October cabinet, as well as coming back with initial savings proposals for next year's budget, we'd have a much more comprehensive update on the financial position. But this is where we are at the current stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. I know it's obviously been widely reported previously to Cabinet and also in the media and on our website, the financial impact of COVID-19 on the council's budget. We've got some detail here for us to consider this evening, so I'll open up to questions or comments, councillors. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. I hope my internet's standing up. Yeah, I mean, we've been through these quite a few times before, so I don't think any of the figures are a big surprise to us. I mean, the figures, the actual figures for the first 3 months on the commercial income, you know, we know that everything was shut, so they're not a big surprise. I think really, I don't want to get into too much detail here, where we're forecasting outturns, particularly on the car parking and the leisure world income. I just wonder if you could give a very brief idea of the sort of assumptions you're working to. You must have some base assumptions as to where you think we're going to be able to make those forecasts. And if you imagine, if you like, we've sort of got a sliding scale of worst case scenario or best case scenario on those predicted outturn figures, where you feel we are on those lines with these figures. And I think my second question is just, there's a figure in there regarding the paper and recycling pressures. I just wonder if you could give a little bit of expansion exactly what the detail is behind that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor King, I wonder if you wanted to respond to Councillor Dundas's first question, and then I'll bring Mr. Cook in regarding the detail in the report.
Thank you. I was going to be quiet for a second, but I wouldn't be quiet for long. I think the first thing to say is, well, there's three things. The first is, as Councillor Dundas acknowledges, there's few surprises in here. This has been shared often, and we know from our own experience and our knowledge of the shock to business of all kinds, what's been driving that sort of cessation, almost complete cessation of income streams, and what might be driving the recovery, the unlocking of the economy that we see everywhere. Paul, to your central point, which is around the forecast, we have shared those. Happy to do that so again, because there's quite a lot of detail, but happy we can do that. I'm going to provide another member's update. We can walk through that again, probably before October's cabinet meeting, or if not, shortly afterwards. Either way, we'll have another opportunity to walk through at depth. But what we did in May and June was run a whole set of scenarios, did share those afterwards, and they were around, as you'd expect, the sort of worst, the middle, and the better case, and it's sort of broadly best judgment. So all the numbers are based upon, and I sort of challenge the team, and they challenge others on what people are seeing as their changing experience as a service manager, and then frankly, they're about as well placed as you and I are after that, because they're making a judgment about what that suggests, and they suggest and we accept that there will continue to be recovery through this year, but we will at all points be there are some small exceptions, like museums are optimistic about their recovery, but with the big service income streams, we're assuming we'll be under the mark of previous years right through the year, and we're assuming that in future years the same will be true. Can I just add one extra thing, and it's no surprise this, which is those of us who are watching, probably all of us, where COVID is going, anticipate some more rocky times. So I'm hopeful that there is some latitude within our numbers, that things may turn out to be rather better, but we're going to be really careful about that. That's Paul Cook's professional judgment. He'll say it better than I, but that's our collective judgment, because 1 month of a lockdown or a few weeks of a lockdown will take away $1 million. So that's the kind of way that we have to look at this. So these are cautious estimates owned by each of the service leads. They assume, makes sense to me, best as anybody can tell, that we will not recover in full this year and that we've got a longer term problem. How great will depend upon, in our view, the impact on consumer confidence and business activity from events we're only glimpsing darkly through this winter.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I think we all recognise that it's very much a moving feast, isn't it? And the news that's coming out around the COVID-19 infection rate over the last 48 hours suggests that that rocky road may arrive sooner than perhaps we were forecasting even just a week ago. I know, and I think all members are aware that both you and Mr. Cook have been providing members briefings on a fairly regular basis, along with a couple of meetings where we've been able to see how your forecasts have been arrived at, to question those in detail, and to reassure ourselves that the forecasting is based on best guesstimates, which I think is the best we can do in the current circumstances. If I could just bring you in then, Mr. Cook, please, if you could respond to Councillor Dundas' question.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think this generally is difficult on forecasting because, you know, we'd be absolutely delighted if the figures were better, but we just, as you say, have to exercise a reasonable degree of caution, especially since, you know, we don't know what will come over the next few months. But on car parks, we assumed quite a, you know, virtually minimal income in Q1, but then by the end of the year we get back to something like 57% of our normal budgeted income. On sport and leisure, again, closure most of Q1 and get back to about 43% of our normal budgeted income by the end of Q4, but we are working on these forecasts quite actively. Recycling is one, you know, that forecast has moved around quite a bit. So again, we'd hope by the time we come to October Cabinet, you know, we'd have a much stronger basis of months past, clear idea of where things were going. But we certainly welcome the opportunity to, you know, run through the figures with any councillor who has queries about them as we go along. We'd like them to be better, but we just need to be cautious because it's so uncertain what the impact will be.
Councillor Dundas, I'm not sure Mr. Cook answered your specific question.
Sorry, yeah, I think just the last comment was whether you could just expand on the figure put in there for the recycling and collection pressures. I think it's about, I haven't got it in front of me, I think it's 570,000, something like that.
I think that is, sorry, Ken. Yeah. That is mainly in the form of recycling credits and relates to the volumes, but also the disposal of recyclables. So perhaps if it were helpful, I could give you some more detail about that offline.
Yeah. That's absolutely fine. And thank you for the other comments. I think I do fully understand. And I would just like to say as a general comment, I think Councillor King in particular have been and continues to be very open with what's happening. And I think we all know that the forecast figures will change almost on a daily basis. And I think it'd be unreasonable for anybody to criticise anybody over that. I would also add, anecdotally, I've noticed the car parks seem to be getting busier at the moment, which is good. But equally, I think we've all seen, if we've read the papers today, some of the figures coming out on some of the testing and the hospital admissions swing the views the other way a bit. So who knows where we're going with it. But thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other indications. Councillor Willits? Ah, I see your hand. Yeah. You're on mute, Dennis.
Sorry, I must learn to press my mouse harder. What's happened now?
And that-
Oh, I think I clicked the wrong
There you go,
box,
that's
Chairman.
better.
That's the
Yeah.
that was the
I can
reason.
see you.
I always find this particular quarterly report the most difficult because it's only really taking into account 3 months of financial data, which is always a sort of doubtful commodity. This time around, of course, it's doubly, if not trebly doubtful because of the grave circumstances during the first 3 months of the year. And given that it's that we arrive at these figures by subtracting 2 very large numbers, which are subject to error and variance. Over the years, I've convinced myself that that one puts the sort of the least amount of emphasis into what's going on at this time of year, because with the best will in the world, as has been said, the predictions are as difficult as the problem at the moment. But we are duty bound to produce the information. I was intrigued by the paragraph 1.1, particularly bullet point 2, because our legal obligation is to provide a balanced budget no matter what. And bullet 2 was a bit vague on that. So as governance committee, it's fine to see that the deficit might be 9.2 million before government grants, but what as a committee we want reassurances that at the end of the year it will in fact be a deficit of 0, because under all circumstances governance committee will make sure that Cabinet balances the books, as is its legal responsibility. And certainly, we must all say thanks to Councillor King for the briefings that he's been giving, particularly those on the mandatory, the discretionary and the support services and the costs to the council, because from that, I certainly see that almost no matter what, it will be possible to balance the books. It may be hard, it may be tough, but we will not default on our legal duty to ensure that we have a balanced budget at the beginning and also at the end of the year, and there is ample opportunity to ensure that happens. So, Chairman, I really look forward to the 3rd quarter and the 4th quarter reports, because those are much more meaningful. We can actually see where we're going, how well we've done, what needs doing to make sure the end result is right. So perhaps not too much attention at this time, other than saying many thanks to those who are frantically turning the handle to try and produce some sort of indication about where we're going and what steps need to be taken. Clearly that's really good work which needs to be done, but whether it's right at the end of the year, who knows, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Willits, and I share your pat on the back for those who are frantically turning the handle, as you described it. Councillor Wood, anything from you? No? Councillor Gocher, anything from you? No? Councillor Barlow, anything from you? Right. Councillor McCarthy, anything from you? All right. Councillor King, I'll bring you back in then just to wrap up.
Thank you. I just play back to Councillor Willits. His fine words. He's absolutely spot on. The 1st quarter in any circumstances leaves you with a strong indicator. It doesn't give you certainty. We all understand the circumstances, and the financial team and I are grateful that it's acknowledged as it is. We'll continue to do what we've done, which is keep on it, encourage income growth. I would just, as an aside, sort of say and I've shared this with members, that what we are seeing from our relationship with the bid does give us confidence that, and it really matters in its own right, the town centre is doing rather better than it might have been hoped, rather better than some of its regional competitors, which we have to hope continues. And we might expect that will flow through it to some degree into income streams, at least in terms of the car parks. But it's a long way to go, and the risks are obvious. So we have got some latitude, we have got some hope. I will give Councillor Willits what he's answered his own question. The assurance he rightly seeks and requires, which of course we will balance the budget this year. We'll do that in the way we've described elsewhere, but summarily here. The real trick will be trying to do what we need to do to take cost out of the organisation in a way that does least harm to the wide array of services that we have shared and described, and which are well known by this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. And yeah, I'd just like to add my thanks to Paul Cook and the rest of the finance team for what's been a sterling job in very trying and difficult circumstances over these first few months of the budget. Right, I see no more questions or comments, so we're just asked to consider and note the forecast of the overspend of £9.238 million on the general fund at this time, bearing in mind Councillor Willits's comments about health warning on a first quarter report. All those who are noted, if you just nod, thank you. So that takes us to the end of item 8 and on to item 9, capital expenditure. And I think, Mr. Cook, you're going to introduce this for us as well.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the kind remarks on the previous report. I'll roll the handle now onto capital. So this is setting out progress on the capital programme for Q1. And as you'll see in the table under 3.6, got quite a low level of expenditure, 5.379 million against the 61.587 million programme. Obviously, a lot of schemes delayed by COVID. In the appendix to the report, we also, which is on page 52, the schemes are RAG rated, and if a scheme is amber rated, we then give comments under the categories of timing, issues, cost issues, anything that's become more complex about the project, which I hope is a useful analysis. And also got Gary Reid with us this evening. So as I explained in section 3, we're hoping in future reports to move to a more holistic explanation of the programme, not just the financial snapshot in a particular quarter, which, as Councillor Willits was explaining, you know, especially Q1, doesn't perhaps tell you everything about the schemes you might want to know. So I don't know if you wanted to take that presentation now, Chair, or after questions on the main report.
I think if we take questions on the main report first, and then we'll come back to that. Thank you. Any questions or comments on the main report before we look at the RAG? No? Oh, Councillor King, did you want to come in at this stage, or is that... You're on mute, David.
It's always better when somebody else does it, Chair. Thank you. I just wanted to make a point that it's been an issue of discussion in the committee before, which is that the reports hit the mark in terms of an obligation to provide insight into expenditure, but where we want to move this by degree, and there are other reporting fora, of course, but to make this more real for the committee, and in my view more valuable for all of us, we have to continue what you can see in the tail of the report, which is more of a programmatic and a delivery sense to where each of these key projects are. Because this is not just about, important though it is, from my perspective, spend in the year. Financial management absolutely does matter. It's an issue of good governance and practicality, does give you an indicator of health, but the presentation you'll get from Gary will illustrate to us where we're going to be heading, and that's going to be towards providing something which will give a more holistic picture, as I say, a sort of programmatic bias, which I think will be more useful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd agree, and I think the way this is laid out for us this year is much better. It's much easier to see what's happening, so we can look at those areas that might be of concern to members, but also we get an indication of what's going well. Gary, welcome along. At this stage then, am I handing over to you to put a presentation up, I believe?
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome everybody. Hopefully you'll see a large kind of reddish kind of blob in front of you, which is the title of the presentation. Can someone just indicate they can see that I've shared it correctly, please? That's great. On the right hand side, what I've done here is I've just put some various headlines and schemes from last year, and it's interesting your comments about Q1 reports, how they're so early on. What does it actually indicate? It gives an early indication, but really it's not until you get to Q3 you start seeing the direction you're going. The difference in this demonstration and a flat, wordy report is you can then see what's happened previously, and sometimes you can just see what's happening, not totally in the future, but by forecasting. But you can then look back, so you can get some comparative data which will help. I've not got too long for a report, so I'm going to just not go into the 2019 or 2020 elements. I'm going to go straight into the Q1, and what you've got here is headlines for 2021 and schemes for 2021. I'll put some RAG definitions here as well. Just that it's a good reminder of what do we mean by red, amber, green. What does that actually mean? These little arrows here, they're just simply navigation arrows. I'm just going to flick onto to the headlines for the first year. I'm selecting this year, and I'm selecting Q1. And on here, if I select the capital program, that gives you here the worth of the total program. And on forecast for 2021, it tells you that's 62.1% of the forecast. The spend minimal this year thus far at Q1, and that should come as no shock to anybody. And then what we're going to be forecasting for future years. What this filter system does here, that gives you the capital total, but then you can then work it down to the various elements, say HRA, environment, or communities, and it gives you that headline overview. As you select those filters, on the right hand side it tells you how many ambers and green schemes there are, and as well as you select each service or each area, gives you a little bit of background, a summary, and some action required. What you'll see there on the action required is some terminology around prioritise individual schemes. The way the organisation is going now, Councillor King mentioned that it's going to be more than just finance now, that all our schemes and projects will all now be prioritised 1 to 4, and everything apart from capital projects have already been through that process. Also, we'll be introducing climate emergency checklist for every single scheme and project. So moving forward, every single project will have to have completed an emergency checklist, climate emergency checklist, as will the capital scheme. So that just tells you where we are with that, what's actions required. And again, as I select each area, it gives you a little bit the background and summary changes. I'm just going to move now, because that's the headlines that I mentioned. And now we can get to some granular detail of the schemes. Again, I'm selecting the year, and I'm going to select Q1. And on the right hand side here, you've got ambers and greens. If there was any red schemes, they'd be on there as well, but fortunately there aren't any. So let's say we want to look at all the amber schemes. I'll select those, and there you see we've got in current quarter 10 amber schemes. If I wanted to select one of those, let's just say Mercury Theatre, There you can see the cost of the total programme. We can expand that if we want to. What's forecast for this period and what the accrued spend is. It also then breaks it down what the forecast is for the next 3 years ahead. Gives a pretty little picture of what we're talking about. And if we're not familiar with it, we can also tell you there when you select a scheme what the aim of it is, what the description is, and what the current headlines are. Councillor King did mention that we're going to hopefully, if you approve all of this way of reporting, we can then move away just from financial reporting and actually include some true project management reporting is what people are really asking for these days. And now you tell you the timing, the cost and the complexity that Paul Cook mentioned on Amber schemes. I mean, that's all really I've got from this very short presentation. I was only given 5 minutes. But as you can see, when I also select one of the schemes, if you'll note, the priority appears in that corner. So when you select another scheme, the priority changes, and so it goes on. It's as simple as that. I'm very happy to take any questions if there are any at this moment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. Questions, comments, councillors? If you could take the presentation down, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Willits.
Chairman, we were just looking at the new presentation of information about the Mercury Theatre, which I think is going to be one of those more interesting schemes because well, I'm heartbroken that there won't be a panto this year because the whole project was geared up to having a spiffingly fine theatre ready to go just at the panto season, but clearly that's not going to happen. And despite the appeals of Andrew Lloyd Webber to the government today about filling theatres to capacity in the next few months, I think it's doubtful that that is going to happen. So are we going to be redefining any of our capital projects, such as the Mercury Theatre, to take cognizance of the fact that life is going to be different this year, it's probably going to be different for the next 2 or 3 years, and that a leisure world, at the theatre, we may have to make quite expensive structural changes which are not currently in the capital budget to ensure that those facilities can continue to earn their keep. I mean, they're not going to earn 100% of their keep, but we don't want them lying idle doing nothing until such time as the COVID issues are solved. But at the same time, we don't want to spend megabucks if Putin comes forward with his Oxford stolen vaccine and saves the world overnight. But I mean, a realistic view is that we're going to be in difficulties with public health for the next 2-3 years. And is it worth spending capital funds to try and make some of these buildings more usable during this rather difficult period? Thank you.
Thank you. I think probably the best person to answer that is Councillor King, because the decisions about capital expenditure will have been taken by Cabinet. Some of these programmes will have been in the making for more than a year or two. So I'll ask you, Councillor King, if you have any response for Councillor Willits. You're on mute, David. It's all right, 3 strikes and you're out.
Yeah, no, thank you. I might opt for that, Chair. That might be quite a good idea. I just want to sort of thank you to Councillor Willits for that sort of really, really thoughtful set of observations. If I go through it in sequence, if you will bear with me. First of all, we have, as he will understand, understandings with both Mercury and in turn with the Arts Council, which has led to the funding between us. And of course, they've had an extensive fundraising programme of their own. to deliver what will be a superb facility, and one focus on that balance that every good theatre has of the capabilities in which you train and then display your art to maximum enjoyment of your customers, and then they come back and all of that. And as he says, I too am heartbroken at no panto. Hopefully other members are like him, going to wait like I will till next year and we'll go. I think that the serious point here is this is such an advanced stage and it takes such a long time that change is going to be, I think, impractical against the programs we have. I think those come towards their close. The issue will be how much extra cost and who will pay for those extra costs. There will be an issue of contractual claims and COVID force majeure and lawyers' delight, but I hope we'll do better than that. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that in terms of their ability to run themselves as an organisation, depending on how much help does trickle down, and I know that there are certain phases of engagement with the Arts Council which are closing in the coming day or so. So, we might hope, might we, that revenue and or capital overrun and cost support will come from that. So it's 1, 2, and 3. So that's the second step. Is how big's the challenge right now, and then what's it going to be in the month ahead? And we're back to our earlier conversation. Who knows how difficult it will be? But the reasonable assumption is that it's going to be very difficult to do anything of substance in terms of putting on arts programs with mass gatherings for all the reasons we understand. But I think the point I want to take from Councillor Willett's observations is that we absolutely should and will, in the dialogue we continue to have with the Mercury and other national organisations, we are blessed in Colchester, as we all know, is watch their health and engage with them where we need to see where we can help. And we can't have an open promise, but we can say we absolutely, we have been friends and patrons in the best sense. This council, and this is Pan Party, supports the MPOs for all the reasons we know, including, simply put, the vibrancy and attractiveness of our town as a destination for its residents and its visitors. We're just going to have to play a long game and, just as I say, keep it in as close a step as we can. I just don't know today, frankly, what call there might yet be. And this is beyond capital, in my view. This will become a real issue as has been discussed, and you've alluded to it, Councillor Willett, for the absolute vibrancy and health of the sector and its ability to recover. There's no secret, so I think, so I'll say it, let's just say this, that from over 70 staff, they're going on a shoestring with a handful. And I don't know their individual circumstances. I feel for each of them as you will. But at some point, people will have to find other ways of making a living. And that's both a sad thing, but a real challenge for that organisation. But they are very resourceful, very determined, very well connected and very well regarded. And with the support of members here and elsewhere, I hope we'll help them see their way through.
Thank you, Councillor King. Yeah, looking at the appendix with each of the schemes and those that are in amber, I've just had another look through. I think with the possible exception of the Mercury, just because of its specific circumstances and the impact of COVID-19, I think having a look through the other programs that are amber, though, there's none in there that I personally would want to see reviewed and pulled out of the capital program or even reconsidered. So I think we are where we are again, aren't we, in terms of the impact that this pandemic is having on everything. Any other questions or comments on the capital program? I'm looking around the room and I'm not seeing any hands up or anything indicated. So with that said then, Mr. Cook, is there anything that you want to just wrap up with?
I think we will take on board those points about potential redesign, because we do want to be reactive where necessary to try and promote recovery of the town centre. So if we need to review schemes, I think again we'd come back in October Cabinet perhaps with more information on that, but we'll certainly try and take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So we're just asked to note the forecast and progress on the capital programme. I think we've duly noted, and also I would just like to again state my thanks, and I would hope the thanks of the committee for the way in which this report is now being presented to us. It's much easier to see what's happening with individual parts of the capital programme. So thank you to you, Mr. Reid, and everybody else who's put that together for us.
Thank you.
Right. So I think I saw just about everyone nod their head, but I'll just double check. Yeah. So we're all in agreement to note. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Thank you, Mr. Reid. That takes us on to item 10, which I believe Hayley McGrath is going to introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual review of the risk management process during the last financial year, 2019-20, and it's reported to this committee because you have the responsibility for reviewing the effectiveness of our risk management processes. In the report, I've set out for you 3 key areas: the work undertaken during the year, the risk management strategy that we have, and also our strategic risk register. So if I talk about the work undertaken so far this year, for the 19-20 year, there were no significant changes to the risk management framework and the principles that we applied with risk management, but we have started a review of the process, more of the ways that we manage those risks and we capture those risks and report them throughout the organisation. So, and you will see in the strategic risk register a bit later on that we have a new format that we're trialling for that, which is now showing you the pre and post mitigation actions, whereas before you just had 1 score, you now have 2 scores, just to give you a little bit more clarity on how those risks are managed. Other work that we've undertaken includes working with Colchester Commercial Holdings Limited, looking at the insurance and risk programmes, making sure that the insurances that they have are suitable, because they are slightly different to the councils. They do form part of our insurance programme, but they do require some specialist insurance. And I've also started looking at Colchester Borough Homes' insurance programme, and we're working a bit more closely with them now in terms of giving them support with their insurance processes, helping them with their claims and looking at placing their insurance for them. We also work quite closely with the safety advisory groups for Colchester, which includes all of our major partners, including the police, health authority and highways, and also the safety advisory group for the stadium. So we look at major events in the town at the stadium, and we work out whether there are going to be particular issues, noise issues, public order issues, and obviously just lately there's been looking at the COVID risk assessments for events as they started to come back online as well. And we also manage the joint risk registers for the North Essex Parking Partnership and the museums, the joint museum service with Ipswich. And all of those processes have continued appropriately, and we've been audited during the year, and they've come out with substantial assurance. There's no particular concerns they've raised with those. Looking at the strategy does form part of our policy framework, so it is part of our constitution, and it's good practice to ensure that the strategy is reviewed at least once a year to make sure it's still appropriate. We've carried out the review for the strategy for 2021. There's been some minor changes, only external review comments have been updated from our external auditors, for example, and reference to external guidance. So some of the documents that we use have been updated that gives a bit of guidance on risk management, and that's been incorporated into the strategy. But it's not felt that the strategy needs to be amended in any form. However, what we will need to do is ask for your approval to endorse the report to go to Cabinet, then be able to be approved at full council, so we can actually update the Constitution with the new version. And finally, looking at the risk register, obviously that's the probably key document that you're probably quite interested in. During the year, we had been we review the register on a very regular basis. The senior management team review it at least every 6 months, and they've been reviewing it more regularly than that in the last year. And consistently throughout 2019-20, the risks were very straightforward in terms of the exit from the European Union, security of data, and council finances were key risk areas. We had identified around about Christmas time some risks that could be reduced and removed from the register, because it was felt that our risk profile was reducing. The key areas that we were concerned about were being adequately controlled, and it felt that we could make some of those changes. However, obviously the latter part of 2019-20, the situation did change in terms of some of the issues that we faced as an organisation. In January, we reviewed the strategic risks, and we also reviewed our business continuity processes and our flu pandemic plans, because we were aware that COVID-19 was circulating in other parts of the world, and we felt that we needed to make sure that our processes were appropriate to be able to respond to that if it occurred. Obviously, at that point in time, I don't think anybody probably anticipated the issues that were coming our way, and actually what happened, you know, to the whole country from kind of March onwards. But our plans actually gave us a little bit of a head start in that, in terms of managing our risks. So we were able to adopt some of our processes very quickly, identifying key risk areas, vulnerable officers, looking at which services we needed to prioritise to respond to those issues. It also meant that the risks, when we reviewed them, changed quite dramatically. So some of those areas where we felt those risks could be reduced, and I think it would be fair to say that the council finances was one of those areas where we felt that the levels, the score could be reduced. It's not the case anymore. Obviously, we look at that now, and in terms of the reports that have already come to this meeting, the briefings that have been undertaken, you know, the council finances as a result of the COVID pandemic have actually changed significantly. So that increases the risk that we had. So our key risks now are much more high profile. We have the budget strategy. Obviously, COVID-19 itself is a risk now that's identified on the risk register, because there are impacts onto the organisation in terms of how we deliver our services. We're looking at our spending power and what we are able to do, and obviously you just had to report that capital. Looking at our staff resources, but also compliance as well, in terms of making sure that we actually make sure that our processes are appropriate, given some of the quick changes we've had to make. And I know that's an issue that we've discussed before at this committee, in terms of how we've responded, how quickly responded, and whether we were compliant in that response. So obviously we make sure that that's now on the risk register, but we still have things, EU transition, that is another issue that now is going to start becoming a bigger issue for us. There's more information coming out, the impacts on our communities and how that's going to affect the Borough Council. And obviously data protection and cybersecurity are still key risks out there. And the COVID pandemic has actually increased those risks. So for opportunists trying to make the most of the pandemic scenario, they're now using that for their cyber attacks and their kind of efforts to get information and to persuade people that the information they're providing is for a bona fide reason. So really, it's whether you have any questions on the strategic risk register, any comments on the new format and the layout, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Hayley. Yeah, so we're asked to, our role this evening, members, is to consider and comment on the Council's progress and performance in managing risk from April 19 to March 2020, to consider and comment on the current strategic risk register, to consider and comment on the proposed risk management strategy for 2020-21, and then to endorse submission of the report to Cabinet for approval. I myself quite like the new format. I think it's clearer and cleaner than the ones we've previously had, so I'm very happy with that. Thank you, Hayley. I'll open up to questions and comments from other members. Do I see a hand up? Councillor King. You're on mute, David. That's it. You're out.
I'm talking to myself as I enter. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Hayley. Dan Gascoigne, who I see there, and I spoke about this morning. I hope members will bear with me if I say what we've talked through before. The most important thing about a risk register of any kind is that it's used, because it doesn't have to be absolutely right. Circumstances are changing, but there has to be a reasonable vehicle for ensuring that the organisation in all its dimensions, and in government you've got the political dimension as well, that it stimulates and enables a conversation of quality, often enough to be helpful to everybody. I'm clear it still does. Dan and I will be having a conversation in a week or two on the back of tonight. I too welcome the tuning and adjustment, because it shows that reaction to circumstances that we need to see. I think there are some interesting debates about where it might next go, and in terms of the register, we ought to be comfortable as a committee and as members that by its nature it will change. The circumstances will demand of us, will set us new challenges and demand of the organisation a response, and that will impact on the register. But this is really good work. And the fact that Hayley in particular finds herself called upon to do it for other people is, I think, encouraging, that if others can find it helps them, that we might take some comfort from that. But I think this is a document, some quality. I just counsel members that the real challenge is to make sure that the organisation uses it. My experience is that it does, and to accept that this will alter again. I think we need to have a focus on outputs, and that will be different because our economic context and crisis is going to become yet more important as we go through COVID and another winter. So I expect an even deeper focus, frankly, on recovery, but that's all ahead. This is a really, really important next step, and it's caught the sense of our times, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Willits, and I know, David, that Councillor Willits will probably have one or two comments about how the risk register is designed and what's in it when he makes his remarks. Councillor Willits.
You're so kind to give a summary of my views, Chair. Congratulations. I think the way this is set out certainly makes it much clearer to understand. I mean, the previous one-dimensional risk register was obscure. Perhaps I didn't read it and study it and love it enough, but it was obscure to me. Whereas now we have a much more logical approach. We see what the risks are before we do anything about it, the unmitigated risks. We then have the commentary and the post-mitigation after it's been looked at and fixed, whatever we can fix. What is left, and to see the change between those two is enlightening, because of course it's the after the extra controls and measures have been brought in that we're really interested in, not the absolute risk which otherwise faces the council. My only comment on the presentation is that at times we accept risks. I spoke to the military, they understand this better than I do. The people are always going to die in action. They're going to fall down a mountainside. Their aircraft's going to run out of out of fuel, and they just have to accept that from time to time these things will happen. And I think Cabinet likewise has to accept that there may be some high risk issues where it is only possible to partially mitigate the risk, and we're just going to have to live with certain risks because it's either not worth it, it's impossible, or it would cost too much to actually bring the risk down. And I think the IT area is quite clear. You know, it's possible to design totally secure IT systems which will never leak information, can never be hacked, but unfortunately can never be used because they're so cumbersome and complex. So you have to strike a happy medium. And the only immediate addition I would like to see to this is a dialogue on if Cabinet accepts that there is a risk which we're going to take on board, having considered all the features. You know, there is no point in continuing to bash people over the head on the fact that we've got some fairly high risk activity when we know we're not going to do anything about it. We need to focus our attention on those and comment on those areas of risk where it is possible for a realistic cost to make significant improvements to our processes and reduce their risk. My second point, Chairman, is that I still think there's a bit of political spin. Well, sometimes I describe it as political spin, but it's probably social spin on some of these issues. I have a clear view on how risk should be managed, and it should relate to CBC's responsibilities. CBC is not the National Health Service. It's not the Social Security Department. It doesn't run universal credit. It runs a narrow range of essential public services which we deliver to the people of the borough, and we should try and contain our view on risk to those essentials. Now, it is very easy to look wider and say, what are the wider social impacts of universal credit not working properly, and perhaps we have to put a bit of money into food bank and so on. We can do it because it's within our powers to do that, but it is not one of our principal responsibilities. We should be confining our risk analysis, or the majority of our risk analysis, to those things which are our principal services which we give to the public, and not be sidetracked. And as has already been telegraphed well ahead in the presentation, the risk I keep going back to demonstrate these points is ST1, the Brexit point of view, where we've looked at it on many occasions. We cannot see what the high risks are to the service delivery by this council. We hear it's supply chain, but no one will actually mention which particular supply we're not going to be able to get hold of. Will there not be enough pencils and rubbers for the planning department to continue turning out planning applications? What are the critical supply chain issues which will fall apart if we don't have the right deal for EU exit? And we've been around that one several times, and every time we've not identified any significant risks to the council. Yet every time the risk register is produced, it always comes in massively high, because I guess there are some very influential members of the council who don't like EU exit and are quite happy to ramp it up as, oh, it's the highest risk, it will wreck the council if things go the wrong way, whereas the effects are likely to be very minor, as we found out in the past. And that's perhaps one of the easiest ones to follow. And I just have this worry that all too often the focus of our risks, and it's a natural tendency, Chairman, they go beyond the duties of the council into the wider community, and we start bringing on board impact and effects which perhaps are not wholly germane to delivery of the public services which we have at hand. So I think there are still some difficulties with it, but it's a phenomenal improvement over where we were 5 years ago in terms of the process of looking at risk, seeing how the strategic risks impact on our processes and operations, and I think it's a big step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm reassured by the reports that Hayley McGrath brings to this committee on a regular basis, in the depth and detail that she does, that the council's management of risk is appropriate and it's prioritised. So I'm not too concerned about the fact that EU exit is still in here as a risk. I think it probably is, and therefore it should be included. We might argue about how high a risk or lower risk it is, but nevertheless a risk it is. So I don't have any issue with it being in there. I think I heard you make an earlier point about ensuring that when the risks are detailed in this register, that they do reference possible impacts either to the council or to the residents of the borough of Colchester specifically. And I think that there's some merit in that, Councillor Willett. But generally speaking, I'm very pleased with the new format of the risk register that's presented to us this evening. I've got Councillor Barlow and then Councillor King, and I'm not seeing any other indications. So if anyone else wishes to comment or speak, please put your hand up. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a quick point, because basically I just want to disagree with what Councillor Willett said. I think the council has a much wider role than just service delivery. I think it's the representative body for Colchester Borough. I think if you see councils purely as service delivery organisations, I think you're missing a wide and important part of their role within democracy locally and in the country. And I think I just wanted to state that and put that on the record rather than just to let Councillor Willett's comments go unchallenged there.
Right, thank you. Councillor Gocher.
Yes, I kind of just want to echo what Councillor Barlow has just said. But as well, I'd just like to ask a question in terms of who decides exactly what is on the risk register and how much political input is there into that. But I just wanted to ask that question. But I do agree with what Councillor Barlow has said, that we have a wider role than just completely narrow provision of services. And in terms of the EU issue, there's so many unknowns about how it will affect the economy, and by affecting the economy, so affecting our income streams, that I can see why it would be on the risk register.
Thank you. Councillor King, did you want to respond to the political question, and then I'll ask Hayley McGrath just to come in around how the specific items end up on our risk register.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comments from Councillor Willett and Councillors Barlow and Gocher, and for you also, Chair. If I wrap those together, and Hayley can reinforce or sweep up whatever I leave untouched. I think it's really important, and we've had this conversation before, that I say again, and I get heard, this is not politically biased. This is a working tool, and it would have much less value if it was anything else other than a working tool. The process is described. Hayley can touch on that. From a cabinet and a political perspective, I rarely intervene. I ensure I have the occasional conversation as the oversight portfolio holder. I have to say, my fellow cabinet colleagues will always be interested if I remind them they need to be interested. This is something I'm sad enough to quite enjoy, so they're quite happy to let me play in this sandcastle when I need to. But most of the time, to be frank, I don't, because it's well run, it's a working tool, and as it is described in the paper, it informs a conversation between the SMT and officers at all levels. Cabinet take an interest when they need to and should, and I do that. I hope I help officers when it comes to it. I do not say where something should be. It's an attractive thought, Dennis, whether something should move up and down at my whim, but it doesn't. I think it is just an issue of judgment, and I do accept, in fairness, that you can, as the chair observed, you can say something could be up or down on the list. For me, it goes back to the beginning of the conversation that this is something that's to help ensure that as our circumstances change, we're having thoughtful conversations at the right level and at a senior level, just to make sure we're watching what we need. And so that's why sometimes nothing will happen for all the reasons Councillor Willetts described. It might go beyond a narrow interpretation. It might get into a wider and therefore less definable interpretation of role. But that's quite reasonable. We here as an authority, all of us, or whatever the political colour, are here to make life better for our residents. And therefore you get to the heart of well-being. So you're getting into abstract as well as into what's measurable. So I think there's a reasonable balance here. It's not politically biased. I do give you assurance genuinely one more time. It's a working tool that's improving, and I think, as has been acknowledged by everybody, we're the better for that. It will take some more steps, and so that might change some of the description, some of the language, some of the relative priority, but that will be a natural dynamic, not a political one.
Thank you, Councillor King. Hayley McGrath, would you just like to come back to the point that was made by Councillor Gocher and pick up on anything that was made by Councillor Willetts?
Of course, in terms of how we put the registers together, there's actually no political input when we actually identify those risks. It's a process that we do on a very regular basis, and I work closely with all of the senior management team. So once a year, I have an individual interview with each of them, including the Chief Executive, to talk about risks and what the risks are to our organisation, to achieving our objectives. And I do challenge them, and I will go along to a senior management team meeting, and I will set out the risks that they've identified, and I will challenge risks that I think maybe they should be considering, and others where they may consider the risk to either be quite low or high, and whether that's in the right context. And I think it's fair to say there are some robust conversations sometimes at those senior management team meetings about those risks. The information that we draw together comes from a variety of sources. So it's our internal audit reports. I will always look at the high level recommendations. Where we have a level 1, they'll be included. We'll look at those issues. We'll look at emerging issues in the wider governance arena. We'll look at any particular things we've got wrong in the organisation. So if we have a significant insurance claim or we have a significant complaint, ombudsman's reports, we will take those into consideration, and I'll be highlighting those to our senior managers when I have those meetings. So I'll always go to them with a selection of items they might like to consider. And each service area looks at their own risks as well. So they look at their operational risks, and the high level operational risks quite often get fed into the strategic register at a higher level in terms of how that impacts on our objectives. Once we've done that piece of work and we've put the risk register together, that's the point that Councillor King tends to see the risk register and actually be able to make any comments. But I can't say that I've particularly changed a register because Councillor King has asked me to, or changed any of those risks on there. Obviously, I can't say whether senior management have been influenced by Councillor King, but what I would say is the conversations that I have with senior management are accurately reflected in the register that we put together. Now, obviously, that's a collection of views, and there's always going to be a difference about how people view risk, what's significant and what isn't. What we are doing as part of the review work is we've asked our internal auditors, TIA, to come in and do an external challenge with senior management team about the risks that are on the register. So pulling in their knowledge and understanding of local authorities and local government and some of those emerging issues and how other authorities have been responding to them and how they are categorising them. We're asking them to come in and then challenge us on our register to make sure that there is that piece of work that shows it's not just one organisation's view. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Hayley. Yeah, I have to say, given that my job is about assessing, overseeing and managing risk, I'm always impressed with the presentation that Hayley makes to us over risk management within the council. I'm also equally, I think, not only impressed, but slightly anxious when she talks about how she challenges the senior team, because I've no doubt that you do. and that, I think, it stands us in good stead as a committee, because we know that you have been thorough in reviewing the risks, assessing and identifying the risks and bringing those risks to us here in an honest and open way, so that not only we as members can see them, but the residents of Colchester can appreciate what's going on in terms of risk management. So I think that's the last of the comments and questions. So we're asked members to endorse that this report is submitted to Cabinet ultimately for bringing to full council. So I think, Matthew, in this instance, you'll have to take the roll call, please.
Yep, certainly, Chair. Councillors, I'll call your names out in alphabetical order if you'd indicate whether you're happy to accept the recommendation. So, Councillor Barlow.
For.
Councillor Dundas.
For.
Councillor Gocher.
For.
Councillor McCarthy.
For.
Councillor Pearson.
For.
Councillor Willits.
For.
And Councillor Wood.
For.
Thank you, Chair. That's unanimous.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Hayley, for a full discussion on risk yet again. And Councillor King, thank you for your input this evening also.
Thank you.
That just takes us on to the work programme for the year. So, Matthew, is there anything in there that you want to just draw our attention to at this point?
No, as you're aware, there have been various changes brought about by events to the work programme. There are a couple of items that have been moved that were intended to be brought to this meeting that will now turn up in October, just so you're aware of that, and that includes the review of digital meetings following the COVID-19 pandemic. But other than that, everything is as you're used to seeing.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Any questions or comments about the work programme? It's nothing that we haven't been working through and weren't expecting. So we note that, and that brings us to the end of the meeting, everyone. So thank you very much for your contributions this evening, for your input, and I wish you all a good rest of the evening.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.